Alright, we're going to be looking at a workflow here that basically deals with the sculpt mode in Blender concerning 3D printing. Alright, so this is more of an exercise than anything else. It's a short, sweet introduction to the sculpting system here in Blender and what you would do to kind of worry about how things are put together. Okay, so the first thing you have to know is I have this user preferences on the input called Welsh keyboard. Okay, if you don't have this, it's because you need it, and it's in the show notes. So go below, there's a py file. You basically hit import, go to where it's located. I have mine on Dropbox, but just simply click on it, and there it's loaded. This keyboard shortcut layout is basically a hybrid of Maya and Blender mixed together. It's for my students that are familiar with Maya and for my students that also should be potentially learning Maya along with Blender. So that's why I use it. Okay, so first thing you need to know is the real brief navigation: Alt left, Alt middle, and Alt right, just in case you're unfamiliar with that. Now if you need a basic introduction of navigation, I have that at youtube.com/cannedmushrooms on the whole navigation aspect. This is just an introduction to the sculpt system. Okay, so let's go to sculpt mode. In sculpt mode, I can go to brushes like an F grab, and I can basically move vertices around. Okay. Also, undo is Control Z or Command Z if you're on a Mac. Here in symmetry, you can click on X, and now when I move one point, its equal point on the other side moves. So as long as you're keeping things symmetrical, or you want to move things symmetrical, that's how you do it. Now that goes across the board with all brushes. So let's say I was in Sculpt Draw. You'll notice the symmetry is automatically turned on. Okay, so what you need is more resolution. That is handled in object mode. So in object mode, you can go to the wrench and you can add a modifier called Multiresolution. And you can subdivide this up. Now, there's a preview and a sculpt. Preview happens in object mode. Sculpt happens in sculpt mode. Here's an example. I can have a preview of one here and be in sculpt mode, and it looks like this. This is to preserve memory. For me, I like to keep these up to about the same because I have a faster machine. So anytime I dip into object mode, it looks the same as sculpt mode. But if you have a slower machine, you could probably take preview down a little bit and keep sculpt up. Alright, now that you have more resolution, we can go to F grab. We can make our brush bigger and smaller using the bracket keys. And you can see I have the ability to move this stuff around. Now, what happens is this thing is really small in the terms of geometry is concerned. If you hit N on the keyboard, you'll see that the dimensions of this little guy is only 2 millimeters. Now, you wouldn't want to go any higher than that right now until you're finished sculpting. The smaller the object, and as you sculpt on it, the less memory it takes. If you get the object too big and try to sculpt on it, it becomes really a painful operation. Okay, so let's just kind of put a couple forms together, and let's look at some of the workflow as far as, let's say I wanted to create some more division in here. And I can go to Sculpt Draw. I have an add and subtract feature, so I can subtract and then basically carve out. I can put a little happy face in this character if I wanted to. Now this video is intended for students that are just starting with this stuff, so I don't want to like develop a troll with, you know, big teeth and burn 10,000 hours doing that. What I would say as a new student with sculpting is, you know, feel free to play around a little bit, but let's say you get overboard like this. This is overboard. I've overran my polygons. You can see right here how they're starting to get a little bit faceted, or the resolution here is greater than the resolution here. This flaw will lead to a bad print because it'll look smooth in this area and then it'll be faceted in this area. So if you get out of control with this, hold shift and you'll see that you can smooth it out. Better to subdivide once, get a little bit more resolution, and then add some more into the area. Unfortunately, you're going to run into a thing called uniformity, and there's no really good way to counteract that just yet. Because we still want to go up and down in levels. The reason for that is if we go down in levels, and let's say I wanted to change this whole look of the head, I can go to F grab and I can move all this chunk of geometry over. I can move this up. I can move this and develop more of a skull. And then I can go back up into a higher level, and it moves all that information with it. If I wanted to just kind of fade it all off, I can just hold shift. In any brush I can do that. So sometimes when I'm just kind of like messing around with sculpt, what I'll do is like make something really ridiculously dumb, and then I'll hold shift and it just basically makes a good skull. Again, there's so many different ways to do this, and it's all based upon like the use of traditional clay, really. Now let's look at like adding another part. If you want to add another part, you can go to object mode, and you notice it lost its resolution. So you can just up the resolution again. And in object mode only, you can add a mesh cube. For new students, you should probably practice just, you know, adding new basic shapes and then sculpting those areas and then adding some more just for fun and entertainment. Treat it just like you would clay, and that you learn a lot from that. So if I add this part and I go back to sculpt mode, it's going to be at a resolution that's really low. How do I add more resolution to it? Well, again, in object mode, you can add a modifier. Once you add this modifier, you can be in sculpt mode and then still add to the modifier. So for example, you know, let's say I go like that and I run out of resolution, I can hit subdivide and add more resolution to it. Hold shift. So sometimes I tell students just, you know, you can probably work out basic shape add a whole bunch of these together and then start sculpting. You can jump between them by going up here. If I'm in sculpt mode, I can jump over to the other one, go into its sculpt mode, and now when I toggle between the two, I can jump, let's say, start sculpting on this one, go to this one, start sculpting on this one. Okay? You don't want to combine these just yet, especially if you're on a slower machine. You want to combine them at the end. Let's look at one more piece of geometry that's really handy to have when you're working with this workflow. So let's go back to object mode. Let's add mesh cube. Another thing you should learn is how to make a proper cylinder. This is how you do it. Hit tab, go into face, this button right here, click the top one, hold shift, click the bottom one. Control E, and then immediately right click. Right clicking will basically get out of the movement aspect of it and leave the polygons behind. Okay, what you've done is extruded the top and bottom and left these polygons right here to be right on top. You can see that there's faces in between these faces. Now if you go back to object mode and add the modifier to this piece, subdivide it, you're going to find that it's a cylinder. And cylinders are great for just powering out legs, arms, antenna, all that good stuff. And the same rules apply. If you subdivide this, you're going to get more and more resolution, and this is a really nice part to sculpt on because it's very uniformed. And when I talk about uniform, I mean like if I go into the box and click on wireframe, you can see that all the polygons are very spaced evenly on this object. The same with this object. If I turn on wireframe, you can see all the polygons are very spaced evenly. Sometimes it helps to have wireframe on, but it does slow down your machine quite badly. Alright, so here's another tip. In object mode you could basically arrange these pieces. Here is move, rotate, scale, and I can rotate these parts, move them, scale them. But anytime I need to blend two parts together, I would heavily rely on just starting out and going into here to sculpt mode. Go back to the wrench, and you can just take this sculpt down quite a bit, and then that. And then anytime that you need symmetry off, you can just turn the symmetry off. Okay, another thing. Let's say I have a piece on one side and I need it mirrored over to the other side. Here's how you do that. In object mode, let's grab a part that has a good middle part to it. Like, let's say this leg needs to go perfectly onto the other side. Well, you could do that by using this piece as the symmetrical mark. Click on this piece. Let's get to a preview of 4. And you'll notice when I hit tab and go into edit mode, what happens? Well, it goes back to its very basic raw cube. Okay, so let's make sure that cube has a good center. Object transform. My bad. Let's go back to object mode. Object transform origin to geometry. This will make sure that the very center is right there. Then we go object, snap, cursor to selected. Let's go back to the part we need mirrored over, this one. Let's go object, transform, origin to 3D cursor. This moves the cursor over to the exact center of the other part. There are several ways to mirror this over. My personal favorite is this. Shift D, right click. This will make a exact copy of it. You can see it's actually sitting right on top. And then I go to Object, Mirror, X Global. Left click. There we go. Now we have one on both sides. Another thing I like to do immediately right off the bat is go Object, Apply, Rotation and Scale. This clears off any history that might have been there as far as rotations are concerned. Another thing I like to do is go to N on the keyboard and drop this down over under Display to Backface Culling. This will show if the part has any problems. Usually when you mirror it, what will happen is it will invert all the normals on the piece. You can see that this looks a lot different than this leg. Anytime you mirror, that's what's going to happen to that part. This will make it so it doesn't print. Alright, to fix that, very simple. Hit Tab to go to edit mode, L to highlight the entire part, and then go over here and flip direction on your normals. Hit Tab again, and you'll see that the part looks normal. Except for this back side. So let's see what happens there. Let's delete that out. I might have touched it with my brush. Shift D to duplicate it. Object Mirror X Global. That looks normal. Object Apply Rotation and Scale. Still looks normal. L to highlight all the normals and flip direction. So the flip direction part is what's screwing it up. To get past that, you can just hit Apply. L on the keyboard, flip direction, Tab. You can see now it looks normal. Sometimes Blender does that to pieces that have the ability to go up and down in resolution. Alright, last piece. Let's say I wanted to make all these pieces the same piece. Well, I could object join them, and based upon their being touching in this area, that it indicates where the surface is. So in a 3D print environment, that is good enough. Now, that is not always good enough on some people that have or are using software that doesn't rely on the outer surface of mesh. For the actual software that we're using in the classroom, touching is good enough. We use Slicer. But if you're using Makerware or anything other than Slicer, sometimes you have to do this. Let's take part A and apply it. Let's take part B and apply it. Part A and part B need to join. Okay. To better do this, I will name the parts. This is torso, and I need to attach the whatever this is, maybe leg. Okay. And we can just indicate that as the right leg. So this one, I could go into here to the wrench, add a modifier called Boolean, where it's got a union, and the union is going to be the right leg. And then hit apply. So what has happened is, now I have this part that's floating on top. I can move it, and you can see it's a hybrid between the two parts, and it shares its common vertices. So now I can sculpt across it. Now the bad thing about this is, You don't want to do this right away. You want to do this at the very end, because see these triangles? Those are unsculptable. You can try, but you're going to find that the blending is quite bad in sometimes. And you know, it all depends on the resolution of your print too. What I would do is develop the character fully, just using, you know, like the basics that I showed you, and then combine them. And I wouldn't combine two objects that are like really, really high poly either. That's another thing. Like if this one was as resolutioned as this is concerned, and I joined it with another piece as equal resolution, you could essentially crash out your machine by having two pieces of geometry with 4 million polys joining. That's not good. All right. So, what else? You know, starting out, there would be maybe a cube. You can add a cube as like an action figure type of stand. I'm not going to tell you anything about like, it's called support material. I don't want you to worry about that just yet. I want you to develop a character on a little support platform and feel free about just having fun. This lesson is not about those type of things just yet. I do want to get back to my original mesh, which is now past the undo mark. So I will put this one back. Delete this leg. And add these two together. I can get rid of cube 3 now. And there we go. So I'll just add that little base. Okay, now at the very, very, very end, it's about scale at that point. So develop all your character using the workflow, get as detailed as you want, but at the very end, here's what you need to do. Let's say I join these two together. You can see because this one's a little higher poly, that might take a second to do. That's what I'm talking about as far as like be careful on how many of these things you're joining together at first. Delete the old one out. Now this one is actually unionized all the way across. If it's too high a poly, there is a thing called Decimate, which allows me to lower the resolution on the mesh and still keep the detail. If you do this, I would highly suggest going back and turning on wireframe. And you can see what's going on. All the quads have turned to triangles, and when I move this slider down, you can see I can quickly hose the mesh. But this lowers the resolution down, and the lower the resolution and still maintaining the detail makes a faster print, or at least a faster slice. So experiment with your numbers. Not all characters are the same, and I'm going to just put a 0.19 here. Sometimes typing it in is a little faster, and then applying that. These two are touching. Again, you could unionize those, but for all intents and purposes, I'm going to join mine. And then over here, again, hitting N on the keyboard will bring this up. Here's the dimensions of the character. So I'm going to set a basis of no higher than 50 millimeters Z to preserve our print material in the classroom. And there we go. Now you can export it as a still, slice it up, and then it should be good to go. We use support material in the classroom at first, and so there's going to be support material that prints here onto the character that you're going to have to peel off. If you get these legs at a perfect angle, you do not have to have support material, but it would have to gradually go over and merge together. There could not be any harsh angles. Again, don't worry about support material just yet. We'll get into that a little bit later. But for right now, that's how you put forms together the correct way. You know, how you can use them, how you can use the sculpt tools, and then export it as a printable character in a very brief 26 minutes. So, enjoy.